Welcome to Marketing Demystified, the podcast that connects the dots for business leaders to drive revenue through effective marketing strategy. We chat with marketing experts on different topics that will help you ramp up your revenue. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platforms. Marketing Demystified, the podcast, is presented to you by GrowGetter, your partner in growth marketing. And here's to
Hello, everyone. Are you ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered with actionable tips that can transform your marketing game? You're in the right place. Welcome to Marketing Demystified. I'm your host, Jen Mancusi, CEO and co-founder of GrowGetter, your growth marketing partner. Email marketing is undergoing massive changes, has been for a long time, from AI to inbox changes, new branding options in the inbox. To help us navigate these shifts, I'm thrilled to welcome Chad S. White, head of research at Oracle Digital Experience Agency and author of Email Marketing Rules. Chad has served as the lead email marketing researcher at several major email service providers and is known for his deep insights into email marketing trends and best practices. During his nearly 20 years in the industry, he's written nearly 4,000 blog posts and articles about email and digital marketing. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Thanks for having me, Jen.
I'm so excited to have this conversation because I feel like for the last, 10 years, maybe more, a lot of what we talk about or we hear in the space is email is dead, which is clearly not true. And it's such an important channel for marketers. And so I love having a conversation that's focused on the future of email marketing instead of the past.
Yeah, everybody loves to kick at email marketing because email marketing doesn't have like a single company to back it up. It doesn't have strong trade groups to back it up. So yeah, Facebook can kick it, and email doesn't say anything.
Right.
And it feels it's like it's the favorite channel for everybody to kick at. Uh, One, because it doesn't respond, because there's no organization really behind it. But also because it's fantastic, right? It's cheap. It's ubiquitous. Everybody has an email address or two or three, and the ROI for your marketing is incredibly high and has been for a very long time, despite all the changes that you've alluded to.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of bad email marketing that happens out there. And so it gets a bad rap because of user error, in my opinion. So that can contribute to it a little bit as well.
For sure. Now, email marketing is so powerful that you can do a not very good job and still have a successful program, which is both good and bad. Mostly bad, but kind of amazing at the same time that you can do like a so-so job and still turn out okay.
Totally. Well, we're going to talk about how to do email marketing well and some of the changes that are happening. So I'm very excited about that. Generative AI is transforming email marketing. Can you talk through, some of the main use cases you're seeing for AI in email marketing and what marketers need to know?
Sure. Yeah, no, certainly generative AI has been, sort of the talk of the town for, a couple of years now plus. And certainly it's no different in email marketing. Everybody's talking about it. But it is a thing that is not moving nearly as fast as I think a lot of people think. And so I want to talk about generative AI in sort of three different use cases. I want to talk about it for general copywriting, for personalizing emails, and for designing and coding emails. And all three of these use cases are very, very different. So let's start with general copywriting. This is, I think, the thing that everyone's kind of the most familiar with. This is where you can use generative AI tools to draft copy, including subject lines and preview text, and all the other copy in your email. And this is getting built into email service provider platforms, into email creation platforms. So it's becoming very accessible. So you don't even have to go outside of tools sometimes to get these things. And this is generally pretty good. The big thing here to keep in mind is that these are just suggestions. It's just overall probability. It has nothing to do with performance. I think this is kind of one of the biggest radical shifts that's gone on in AI in email marketing in recent years. Is that prior to generative AI coming along, all of the talk about AI and email marketing was about performance. It was all about using data to improve performance, because a small boost in performance could really make a huge difference for brands, especially larger senders. So now there's been this sort of huge shift now to like, oh, can we make our jobs a little faster, a little easier? Um, but I do kind of want to put those two things in perspective because they're wildly different. So you can use generative AI for all this sort of copy drafting, and that's great. You have to be a little bit careful. You got to use some common sense. So, for instance, folks are talking about using generative AI to like automatically craft alt text for images. I think that's generally a pretty awful idea. Sometimes you don't want any text for your images. And in other cases, you really don't actually want to describe the image per se. So it can get really confusing pretty quick. That's an area I would stay away from. But great for generating copy, great for alternative phrases and exploration, great for sort of editing to space. I like to say that it's like sort of the rule of thumb in marketing is like to write what you want to write and then cut it in half. And I think the rule for email marketing is then to cut it in half again. So there's a very strong trend towards less and less copy. You're really, really getting compact. And generative AI can help kind of squash that down. House style, I think, is another one, making sure that you stay on brand. I think probably in the next few years, every major brand is going to have a generative AI model that enforces house style, making sure that people don't use words that are off brand, making sure they lean towards ones that are, um, you know, reading grade level, and on and on. I think that's going to be sort of the status quo in a few years. And then lastly, using generative AI to take copy that maybe you wrote for a broad audience and then tailor it to specific audience segments, whether that's industry or a kind of consumer, like a mom or a dad or whatever it might be, a high spender who maybe doesn't care about sales so much. Whatever it is, it can be good for that too. So that's the first use case. And again, I think it's the one that everyone kind of thinks about. The next one is using generative AI for personalizing emails. This is the idea that, for the most part, sight unseen, generative AI is crafting copy based on data that you have about an individual, putting that copy in the email, and it's going out the door. Nobody's reviewing it, no one's seeing it. And I have some concerns with this, and this is something everyone's really excited about. So I think this has sort of like the most usefulness in talking about sort of customer service emails that are already sort of intrinsically kind of one-to-one. Sadly, I think this will probably also get used a lot for cold emails. Be a lot of scraping of LinkedIn and websites to like tailor this copy, make it seem really on target for individuals that are being targeted by cold emails. Sadly, that will happen. But by and large, what we find here at Oracle Digital Experience Agency, a lot of our clients are really big enterprises. They're national brands or international brands, and they really want brand control. They want to actually have a fairly common experience, for all of their subscribers, for all of their customers. They don't want everything to be bespoke. They see that as dangerous and sort of detrimental to the brand, to be honest. They also want performance tracking, which currently is not part of the cards for generative AI. I think in long term it will be, but right now generative AI could change all these words and make it very bespoke for an individual, and you wouldn't know, you wouldn't be able to track back like, hey, is it this wording? Is it this CTA? Like, what actually caused this email to overperform or underperform? You would have no way of knowing. That's something that most big brands don't want. I think the other thing to recognize here is that today's technologies really capture, I would guess, like 80% of the personalization opportunity. The idea with generative AI and personalization is that you could personalize everything. Everything about this email could be personalized. And the truth is that personalizing everything isn't necessarily effective. There are tons and tons of things you can do to personalize an email, and most of them have no effect or a negative effect on the performance of that email. It's all about understanding your customer and what are the things that are actually going to move the needle for this particular campaign. So it's a lot of like testing and figuring out, and again, common sense. Personalizing everything isn't really the answer. And the last thing I would say about generative AI for personalization is that the cost economics are not very clear at the moment. I talked to a number of startups last year that were spinning up these kinds of platforms. You might be surprised to learn that there's not a lot of barrier to entry in this space. So some of the folks that I spoke to didn't seem to like know a ton about how email marketing worked and what all the nuances were, what the goals were, or anything. So it was a little bit surprising. But one of the ones I spoke to talked about wanting to charge 7 cents an email for this personalization. Well, most email marketing programs, in like the e-commerce space, don't generate 7 cents an email. So so that's problematic from the get-go, and so that means that generative AI for personalization would have to double, the current output at least, in order to make sense, just even to make sense. And the biggest brag I've seen was that generative AI for personalization boosted performance by, I think it was 81 or 83% or 84%, something like that, low 80s. So in my mind, that's a far cry from where it needs to be. Now, I think over time, that could change. Who knows what DeepSeek's going to do to the cost economics of generative AI? But I do know that it's just early days, and there's been tens of billions of dollars invested in this space. And if I know anything about how business works, eventually they're going to want that money back, and they get that money back by charging more than they're probably charging now when we're sort of like the market share grabbing phase of things. So I'm a skeptic when it comes to using generative AI for personalization. All right, and then the third thing is generative AI for designing and coding emails. And so we've already seen things like GitHub Copilot, which does a pretty darn good job of helping folks write code. Here at Oracle, we've built our own LLM for Apex that helps our coders code in Apex way faster than they could before. And so I think this makes like a ton of sense. I think this is already kind of proven, and I think this is gonna come to the email marketing space in time. Now, the problem with it coming into the marketing space is that we have absolutely no coding standards. We do not have W3. There's nobody enforcing any rules. All of the inbox providers do whatever the heck they want. They change the rules all the time. It changes the coding support either intentionally or unintentionally. It's pretty routinely. And so I think that is like a pretty serious problem. And also the body of work that you would train an LLM on in order to code emails, you would also have to control pretty tightly, because the spectrum of quality email coding out there is also like very uneven. And so you would have to make sure that you were training these models on only good email designs. But also, again, it's likely to change over time. But I think even with even with those hurdles, I think this is something that's absolutely going to happen. There are companies that are already trying to do this. Donata, Combi are a couple of them. So I think there's some promising stuff here, but I think you're always going to need experienced oversight for when these models are coding emails, to recognize when they're running into a snag. If you're doing anything special with interactivity, double checking it for accessibility and some things that they tend to kind of struggle with. You're going to need that. But I think those are the three like big ideas for big areas for generative AI in the email marketing space, where I think there's a lot of talk right now. For better or worse, mostly good, but the personalizing emails bit, I think, that's the iffiest part.
Yeah, interesting. Well, and I think to your point in the very beginning, you said, these things are moving slower than we thought they would. Because of that, what you just said at the end, that it needs a lot of oversight, and really that like we want to use these tools to find the right areas to gain efficiency without losing the credibility or the accessibility or the quality of the work that's being done. When you're talking about using AI for copywriting, and we're talking today about email, but really this applies to any kind of copywriting using AI. You don't want to use the first output. Nor do you want to, I mean, for me personally, I don't ever have AI generate the first draft for me. It's typically content that we already have that we want to restructure or get ideas from or something like that. But as you were talking about, like alternative phrasing or cut it in half and then cut it in half again, I've seen generative AI emails that are always like a million times longer than I would ever recommend sending an email. That's just the starting point, is like a ton of information. So that single prompt usage of generative AI tools is just not going to work for any of these things, I don't think.
Yeah, no, it definitely, you have to know your brand for sure. And you're right, like they're both, I think we have a lot of brands that are in like the B2C space. And so copy tends to be pretty short. But there are brands that obviously lean longer. My favorite example is like newsletters for librarians. Surprise, surprise, librarians love to read the trade groups and stuff for librarians. They tend to be like very long emails, which I think is fantastic. But it's all about like understanding your audience and knowing what they want from you. But I think there's sort of undeniably like a super strong trend towards more visual and less copy, and that trend has been in place for probably a decade at least.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and that what you just said when you were talking about personalization, like understanding your target audience is still a prerequisite for doing any of this personalization work. It's not just doing it for the sake of doing it. And I agree with you. I've explored a few tools that claim to be able to, kind of scale the personalization on your emails, and it's a little bit scary. And I was having a conversation with someone yesterday about the sort of like natural blend that's starting to happen between certain types of marketers and SDRs, because that there's less of a maybe distinction on the roles because of the tools and the technology that's available. So, I mean, I used to always think of like marketing as, communicating to a broader audience. Sales is very, personalized and one-on-one, and maybe the SDRs are somewhere in the middle, but it's personalization at scale. Well, with AI threatening to take that away, there's kind of a little bit of a gray area between how we think about that collaboration between marketing and, say, SDRs or other types of inside cold calling type salespeople. And so I think it'll be interesting to see, is it that SDRs are doing more marketing and are more full funnel, or do we see marketers taking on more of a business development type role in certain roles within marketing? So anyways, very interesting to think about that.
Yeah, no, the change management part of it is no small bit of all of this stuff, really. Because there's definitely going to be a lot of people's jobs changing and their scope and stuff. But the other thing you said I thought was really interesting and totally dead on is that you talked about like you don't want to do things for the sake of doing things, and I do feel like that's a little bit of the place that we're at with generative AI. I feel like everyone's like, oh, what can I use this for? Can I do this? And I feel like there's a lot of, it's almost like dares, right? Like I dare you to like make, an LLM, do this. And we're not thinking a lot about like, should we be doing that? Like,
Right.
is that a good thing to do? Is that a smart thing to do? Does that make sense for our brand? Does it make sense for our goals, for our productivity, for our performance? And I think there's a little bit of that going on where it's like, can we do this? Not should we do this? And so I would definitely, I think I would caution folks to make sure that they don't lose sight of what it is that they're trying to accomplish. And is this the right tool to do that?
Yeah, that's super interesting. There is a sort of like element of, you need to do the experimentation to explore, to see what the possibilities are. But I love that, like, can we do this versus should we do this? That's an important question that maybe we should all be asking.
Yeah, let the vendors see if they can do stuff, but brands need to be focused on themselves, their objectives. Don't get lost in the vendor stuff.
Well, to your point about what you said earlier about like there's a low barrier to entry, anybody can kind of get in and play with these models and build their own. And that doesn't mean you're expert. I've seen this even just at going to conferences or hearing thought leaders talk about these topics, sometimes you listen to a session or read a blog article and you think, wow, this person really doesn't know what they're talking about. But
Yeah.
anybody can talk about it, and anybody can even potentially build these things. So that does become a little dangerous in some ways.
Yeah, my favorite tell is when people start talking about generative AI and machine learning, like almost in the same breath as though they're like the same thing. And
Mm.
like those two animals couldn't be more different. They're not even in the same zoo. Like these are really different creatures. And if you're just like putting them all next to each other, then it shows to me that you don't understand how these actually get used, what their goals are, you know, what their foundations are. So that's my favorite tell.
Okay, that's good. That's a good tip. We'll keep that in mind as we're looking out into the world for experts on these topics. But so, getting back to AI and email marketing, what are thinking about data quality, data in general, integrations with systems? What are some of the challenges that you're seeing in kind of implementing or integrating these tools in with the systems that people are using today?
Yeah, so everyone's obviously incredibly excited about generative AI and in AI in general. Machine learning still has huge promise, and I think everyone is sort of like jumping ahead to that without really thinking about what the prerequisites are. And I think people are learning some hard lessons that the prerequisite for really leveraging AI is data, and they're finding that their data is siloed and fractured and scattered across their organization, and that's making it really difficult for them to be able to put quality data into these tools, and to get the high quality outputs that they want. So I think there's a few things happening. So I mentioned the siloing. That I think is sort of undeniable. This is sort of the ramification of decades of best of breed product selection. Now everybody has sort of these Franken stacks, these Martech
Mm.
stacks that are just all over the place. There's duplicity in functionality. A lot of these tools, less than 50% of the functionality even gets used. And so there's, I think, some pretty big Martech stack rationalization that's happening where uh, for years and years, it seems like IT was not in control of technology. There's sort of this democratization that was happening, where CMOs were mostly making decisions for marketing
Mm.
technology, and we've seen a pretty huge reversal among our clients, where IT is back in charge again of making these selections and making sure that there isn't repetition of functionality, that there's not selections made that have ramifications that are poor for the organization. So I think that's a huge thing. The integration is also part of it. I think we're going to see a bit more sort of best of suite approaches. So uh, kind of having like a core vendor or two that provide like functionality across a number of areas, and then you do some best of breed around it to kind of fill things in. But I think that brands are getting much more mindful of like what that stack looks like. What does the integration really look like? Because obviously, if you ask anybody, "Hey, can you integrate, with this? Can you integrate with that?" They always say yes, right? That's a
Mhm.
horrible question. You don't say how. You say like, "How is it done?" Because it could be batched, it can be slow, and today, like information that's 5 minutes old is probably too old
Yeah.
in a lot of cases, because consumers move really swiftly between channels, and you always want to make sure that you're keeping up with them. So I think this is a massive area that doesn't have a quick easy solve by any stretch of the imagination. Getting that data infrastructure in much better shape, brands who do that over the next few years are going to be, I think, the winners when it comes to AI in all of its flavors.
Yeah, interesting. It's interesting how you talk about, marketers sort of like took control over the decision making on the tech stack for a period of time. And it's now getting back to the technology leaders within organizations are at least partnering on these things in a smarter way. We definitely saw companies that had these you'd have 20 vendors doing the same thing for different departments. Especially the bigger the company, the more likely it was that people had some autonomy to choose different partners or technologies or platforms. And not only are we seeing IT, but also these sort of center of excellence teams sprouting up in these big organizations that are trialing and distributing technology and services throughout the organization. And then they're in charge of the adoption and probably working more closely with IT. But, also what you said about the integrations, I mean, everything can be tied together with a Zapier hook or something. So it's not always the best way to bring data together, but it can always be done. So I love what you said. Like, how is it done? Is it native? Is it, how quickly is the data going to come across? But that challenge of, well, certainly in insights, data being siloed across teams and being hidden and or even just not managed properly and difficult for people to find, that is going to be a big challenge for, if you don't really have a good picture. Some companies have done a good job of building their own DMPs years ago and maybe have things all in one place. But anyone who's a little bit behind there might struggle to get where they're trying to go and skipping over that step.
Yeah, you did mention like having different tools like across the organization that do
Mhm.
the same thing. I think that's the easiest place to start. Especially if
Mhm.
you're like a larger organization, maybe you have multiple divisions, or even if you're international, right? You've divisions in different countries. Uh, to the degree that's possible, having a singular platform, that does your email marketing or that does whatever function you're doing. There's no reason to have a different ESP for all these different parts of your business. You should really have it all on one.
Yeah.
Again, there's some differences, like B2B and B2C, but even those differences, I think, are starting to go away a bit.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think companies are getting better about, you know, creating that consistency, mostly maybe from an efficiency standpoint, right? They're looking at the cost more so than they are maybe the data and things like that. That's maybe a secondary benefit to them, but
Yeah,
it's a good trend either way. However you get there,
yeah. I mean,
everybody uses the same tools.
for sure. I mean, vendor management, right? Like,
Yes.
there's huge time savings there. You don't need, I mean, managing all these vendors, all these contracts, that can be a big time savings as well. So you're right. There's like all the sort of ancillary benefits like around the edges, but I think vendor management is definitely one of the ones that is nice when you can narrow the field a bit.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about some of these, inbox changes that we've seen happen. Apple's been making some waves. I think in the fall, Google and Yahoo had released some new spam rules and things like that. What are some of the most significant updates you've seen, and what do marketers need to know, and in terms of how they adapt their strategies?
Yeah. So you mentioned, I like to call them Yahoo goals. So Yahoo and Google, the group. That was amazing because it is so rare for the inbox writers to do anything together, right? I feel like that is like part of like baked into email marketing is that all the inbox writers do their own thing. They have their different standards for rendering, for deliverability. So that was really fantastic to see them getting together. So that was not this last fall, but the fall before that. And it went into effect like early last year. So not even quite a year ago, like around a year ago.
Mhm.
And frankly, those standards were for most major senders not a big deal because they were already doing that. So that was really great to see, but it was great to see them codifying and agreeing on something. And all the rumors are that Microsoft may join in on those standards, which would be fantastic. So that was great to see. Now, beyond those folks, I feel like Apple has been the one that's just like the wrench factory, just like dump trucks full of wrenches, throwing it into everybody's email marketing programs. You go back to I think it was iOS 2015 when mail privacy protection came out, and then since then, I think Hide My Email came out with that link tracking protection. So a bunch of big changes, and then more recently with iOS 18 this past fall, a bunch of new changes that affect email marketers. So that was a pretty big release. So there were sort of three big ones that I would want to talk about. First is tabs. Second is brand message grouping, and then the last one is AI summaries. So let's start with tabs. So there's really nothing radical here. Gmail came out with tabs back in 2013. So
Mm-hmm.
really, Apple is like sort of 10 years the follower. Since then, Microsoft and Yahoo both released tabbed interfaces. Everybody, they all do it differently. Again, of course, because that's the story with email marketing, is that everybody does it differently. But there's nothing really radical here, and a lot of Apple's tabs sort of match up with Gmail's more or less. So it's very similar. Again, tabs are something that everybody has gotten rather used to. It's not really radical anymore. We did have a little bit of a freak out when Apple announced it, because Apple has a huge amount of market share on the inbox provider side of things, not the mailbox providers. They don't have
Mm-hmm.
the base accounts, but people accessing their mail
Mm-hmm.
through Apple Mail in all of its flavors is really big. For a lot of brands, it's 50% or more of their opens happening in Apple Mail. So it's a really important platform for accessing emails. So tabs will have an effect, but generally what you see is that tabs makes it easier for people to find the messages that they want. And when they do go to the promo tab, it means they are a much more intentful you know email consumer at that point, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like their intent goes up just by visiting the tab and looking at those emails, versus your promotional email mixed in with emails from someone's grandmother or whatever it might be, right? Like, you're not getting their full attention. They're not really there for that. So what we tend to see is that opens decline a little bit, but clicks hold strong. And so I think we're expected to see the same thing. It's not, yeah, again, I don't think it's a big deal. Plus, there's some nice little tweaks that Apple has done to tabs. They have this thing called smart recategorization, and they also have priority messages, and it allows a message that would essentially be in one tab to show up, say, at the top of the primary tab, to make sure that you see it. If they think it's really important or super timely from in terms of its message or the sender, they'll surface it in other places so that you're more likely to see it. I think that's pretty nice. Hopefully that'll ease a little bit of anxiety that brands have about the promo tab being akin to the spam folder, which it totally is not.
Mm-hmm.
But so that's the first thing. The second one is brand message grouping, and essentially what this does is that Apple Mail really only shows you the latest email from a brand. So if you're sending multiple, promotions a day, then it's going to sort of blunt the effectiveness of that high frequency strategy, because you're only going to see the most recent one. And then when you click into that, and you can go to it's sort of it's like a page for the brand and all their emails. It's a little bit strange because they tend to list the emails from the oldest unread versus the newest unread. So it's kind of like the reverse of, I don't know, it's the reverse of what I would expect.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of folks don't open every email that they get from their favorite brands, because they're not always in market. So, and they know that, so they're not always opening them. And so it'd be really, I think it's pretty strange that I would open that and then I would see something from 3 months ago. That's not helpful to me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see, the more recent emails and see what the brand is talking about. So it's a little bit weird. Maybe they'll change that, but that's another one that's probably going to have an effect. Then the third one, I think, is the one that's sort of kind of have the biggest effect, and frankly, makes me the saddest. It's AI summaries, and essentially what's happening here is that, kind of following the lead of Gmail, Apple is replacing preview text with an AI summary by default. And so the preview text is the text that appears either underneath the subject line or next to the subject line. It's usually, it's text that that brands can control. and they've gotten really good at that, having a really nice interplay between the subject line and the preview text. They either, extend the subject line or they bring
Mhm.
in another element of the email. This is something that brands have gotten, I think, really exceptional at. And so this is the thing that was absolutely not broken. And AI
Mhm.
summaries replace that text that is very thoughtful, oftentimes with a bunch of gobbledygook. AI summaries in general are not great. They'll get better over time, I hope, because they're not great right now. It's hard for AI to understand the goal of the email. It doesn't seem to take into consideration what the subject line is. So it's a little bit of, I think, a hot mess. Thankfully, people can turn it off pretty easily. My guess is that probably like half of people probably will turn it off. Um,
Mm.
you know, we see the same thing with tabs. Like not everybody likes tabs, and so I think like roughly half of people turn off tabs. So it's I wish it were off by default and people could add it if they wanted to. But obviously, Apple is trying to like surface their AI work. I find Apple to be very strange. I feel like they don't actually believe in AI. But they feel like they have to, and they feel like they have to like keep up with Google and others. And I think that's why we see so many like really tone deaf ads from Apple that seem to anger everybody that likes Apple. Um, so I think this is like another example of them like trying to like be perceived as a leader in AI and like forcing it into a place that it doesn't do a lot of good. It's the, can we do this versus should we do this? I think they shouldn't do it. Um, I think they should follow in the footsteps of Gmail with like Gemini, where you can like press a button to get a summary. And Apple has a summary you can get inside the email. Once you open the email, you can also like press a button to get a summary of a longer email. I think that's great. You should just make it so that you could opt in that way. But I think that's a big deal because again, brands have gotten really good at pairing up that subject line and the preview text, and AI summaries really mess that up. And again, most brands have at least 50% of their emails opened in Apple Mail. So it has a potential to be a pretty big impact. I would, over the next year as this gains steam, because it only works on the latest phones and the iPhone like 15 Pro and Pro Max. Only like the top end ones can handle the AI
Mhm.
processing. Um, so it's going to take a little while for that to really ramp up in terms of market share. But I think towards the end of this calendar year, brands should start to really think hard about do our subject lines stand alone? Like if you're relying on that preview text to really deliver full coherence for your subject line, then that's a problem. Like sometimes we see like a very sort of vague kind of jokey subject line, and then the preview text like delivers like the punchline of the joke and provides clarity.
Mhm.
That's a tactic that's going to become more dangerous. Like people don't want to be like open baited into opening an email and they feel tricked. So preview text allowed you to do that kind of combo, and that's going to kind of go away, unfortunately. So those are the three big things that are happening with iOS 18.
That's massive. And what you just described, the sort of like the sequence of how we traditionally think about email copy, you want to have an enticing subject line that's going to get somebody interested, preview text that's going to get them to open the email, and then the copy to get, first sentence gets you to read the second sentence kind of thing. But actually, we have to be thinking a lot more about if the copy within the email does a good enough job for AI to create a good summary, or to deem it important enough to serve it outside of its tab. As you were mentioning, if Apple looks at the email and says, oh, maybe you want to take a look at this in your primary tab instead of on the promotions tab, well, you've got to write copy that's going to get the AI interested in your copy. And this is, I mean, maybe a balance that we've been marketers have been facing in SEO and sort of blog writing for a long time, this writing for robots versus writing for humans, right? There's a balance. You have to do a little bit of both. And it hasn't been as big of a requirement in email. maybe until now. And with these new updates, it seems like, hey, we really have to be paying attention to this now. It's like, what is the, like, it's not the SEO, it's the email, optimization for the AI models.
Yeah, no, and you're right. And we talked earlier about great email marketing copy being like copy that you cut in half and then you cut it in
Uh-huh.
half again. So there's not like a ton of copy in a lot of cases for these AI engines to grab onto.
Mm-hmm.
They also, I think across the board, I think they ignore all of the alt text that you might have in an email as well. Um, I know with a lot of brands, the biggest chunk of copy that they have is the legalese at the bottom of the email, which is
Mm,
absolutely what you don't want the AI to be grabbing onto. So I just think this is a case where, AI is being applied to an email in the same way that it would be applied to a blog post. And these are different media.
yes.
These have different rules. They're crafted very differently. A blog post is a destination, and an email is largely a gateway. And
Mm-hmm.
so, again, I think it's this like, can we do this versus should we do this, and not understanding the nuances of what's really going on.
Yeah. Interesting. I'm so curious because this is such a new update. I'm so curious to see what stays and what kind of um as you were saying, the order of things, right? Like the oldest to new it, like are these are going to get tweaked with new releases, right?
I hope
So
so.
what of these functions and features stick around and what continues to change is so interesting. Also, you made a very powerful statement that maybe Apple doesn't really believe in AI and they just feel like they have to do it. That is very interesting to think about.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it just seems to me based on seeing what they do.
Yeah.
But I think the future is really interesting with how everything is shaping up. But you do see some brands like really starting now to build a position where I don't want to say they're anti AI. I don't think that that's the case, but like they're very much thinking about the should we do
Hmm.
this?
Hmm.
Um, uh, like I think it's the design software, was it Procreate? I think they were out pretty early getting out ahead and saying, hey, look, we're never going to add AI to our platform. Our platform is about you and helping you create awesome graphics and so on and so forth. Like really, not putting AI between the user and the output. So I think there's going to be more of that. I mean, I'll also tell you, like, we have some clients that as we're renewing with them, they're putting clauses in our contract that say that we can't use generative
Yeah.
AI
Hmm.
in any of the work that we do. I think some brands, like, they they are thinking very much about this question of can versus should, and they're making the decision that, like, hey, we shouldn't right now.
Yeah.
And so I think there's going to be even stronger feelings as we go forward. This is as much of a like a social issue as it is like a technology issue.
Yeah, for sure. And I wish we had time to get into that a little further.
That's a different podcast.
Totally different podcast. Exactly, exactly. I want to talk about brand indicators for message identification. I don't know if we call this BIMI or we just use the letters BIMI. But this could be an important development that we are at risk of potentially overlooking. Could you talk a little bit about what this is and why it's an opportunity for marketers right now?
Yeah, so well done. I always forget what it stands for because it's very long. And for years, I thought it was BME, but BIMI, but I've been corrected. I think it's BME, which makes a bit more sense. It's about being me, so be
Uh-huh.
me. This is a cool bit of technology. This is what allows for your brand's logo to appear next to your sender name in the inbox. So instead of a letter in a circle, a colored circle, you can actually see your logo. And if you go to your inbox today, I'm sure you see brands that have that and a bunch of brands that don't. And so this is a technology that's been around for a while, but it's been difficult to access. So it requires a few different things. The big one is that it requires you to fully authenticate your email with SPF and DChem and DMARC. So these three different standards, and DMARC was the one. It's the newest one. That's what the inbox fighters really wanted you to do. And for years, they essentially threatened marketers with poor deliverability if they didn't create a DMARC record, which essentially tells the inbox fighter what to do if an email fails the other checks, which are sort of like a driver's license, like their identification thing. So,
Mhm.
what happens if you fail the identification process? And so they threatened the marketers for years, and essentially most marketers, for whatever reason, decided they didn't really care. They didn't they didn't want to do DMARC because they didn't see it as being important. And the inbox writers, I think, got smart, and so instead of always just waving the stick around, they offered a carrot. And so the carrot is to have your logo appear, and everyone was like, "Wow, I love my logo. It's the best. I definitely want that appeared next to my message." And so a ton of brands have now authenticated fully with DMARC, which is awesome. It is a little bit expensive. You had to get this thing called a verified mark certificate. It's essentially like a very complicated trademark, and so um, it was kind of expensive, cost thousands of dollars, and you had to have a registered trademark, which not everybody does. So the bar was like a little bit high. So a lot of like mid-tier brands and certainly small businesses, it was never for them.
Mm.
So it's been around for a long time in that form. But what's happened recently has been really big changes in this space. So the first is that there's something called a common mark certificate. This does not require a trademark. It's also much cheaper. And so that allows for many more brands to get access to BME. The other thing that happened is that Apple, I think it was 2 years ago, announced support for BME. But again, I mentioned before how Apple Mail is a huge inbox provider, but a very small mailbox provider.
Mhm.
And BME happens at the mailbox level. And so Apple, in announcing their support, like they have iCloud.com accounts, so they're like, oh, we're going to honor it for that. But if we're going to honor BME for emails that are coming in from Gmail accounts and Yahoo Mail accounts, we need Gmail and Google and Yahoo to make changes to their email headers. Um, at the time, based on everything I heard, Google and Yahoo said, "Sure, we'll make those changes," and they never did. And like years went by, they didn't make the changes. I don't know why. I don't have any insights there, but I think Apple finally decided that they couldn't wait anymore, or maybe that they were never going to make those changes for whatever reason, because these guys are all competitors. Um,
Yeah.
so Apple announced this thing called branded mail and Apple Business Connect. This does not require not a verified mark certificate and not a common mark certificate either. So it's their own thing. Um, but it does require fully authenticated email. It has the exact same goal that all the other BME programs do. Some people have said that Apple's thing is actually not BME. Uh, it it wants the exact same thing, so it has the exact same goal. So in my mind, it's BME. But the thing that's complicated here is that now everybody has their own slightly different standards. So to like get BME on Apple, you have to do X, Y, and Z. On Google, X, Y, and Z, like, A, B, and C, and like it's all like a little bit different. So it's very splintered. Again, welcome to email marketing. No standards, everything's
Mhm.
splintered. But given where we are with these various fractured standards, now upwards of 90+% of your email can have that BME logo appear, and that is amazing. That is amazing. That's great. It reassures folks that that email is not spoofed, that it's legitimately from your brand. Again, brands love you know logo impressions. That's brand building and fantastic. So this is a huge opportunity, and I think like some of the early messaging around beaming was that, oh, if you have this, like your open rates might be like up to 10% higher, and that's great. We didn't really see that prove out with some of our early adopters, but I think the reason to do this is not a boost, but rather avoiding a decline. Like a couple
Mhm.
of years from now, maybe even a year from now, a lot of big brands are going to have BME in place across all the different inbox providers. And so if you don't, you're going to start to look like the black sheep. You're gonna be standing out in a bad way, and people are gonna start to have questions like, hey, why doesn't their email have the logo? Is this actually from them? Is there something wrong here? And so if you don't have Beamy in place, you may actually see a decrease in your performance. And I think everyone wants to avoid that. So I think this is, everyone's talking about AI and everything. I think this is for email marketers. This is the thing to put on your agenda for this year, to just knock it out and be done.
Yeah. This is so interesting. Just going the feels like the theme of the episode, the can we versus should we. There's a lot of very easy things that we can do, and maybe we shouldn't. This is a thing we absolutely should do, but it's actually kind of hard. It's not that easy to do. But it's worth the resource and time investment to get it done for all the reasons you mentioned: the legitimacy, the trust in the brand and in the messaging, which will, of course, improve your email performance, right? People don't want to open emails that are going to give them viruses and things like that. And it's hard to tell the difference sometimes. It gets harder and harder. So anyways, this is a really interesting one that people should definitely pay attention to. And before we end today, I wanted to ask, like, if there's one action that email marketers should take today, is that it? Or do you have another recommendation for one thing that email marketers should be doing to kind of prepare for all the changes happening?
Yeah, so BB is a good one, but I think I would go back to emphasizing the work that needs to be done around data, because I feel like
Mhm.
that's really foundational to all the cool stuff that we need to do in the next few years. So I think that's the one thing you should do, and it's obviously not a super easy thing. It's a process, but getting your data and your systems and your architecture in a much better place, that enables all of those AI opportunities. It enables omni-channel orchestration, which is super important. We haven't really talked about that. We just talked about
Mm,
email, but email is part of this greater tapestry of messages that we're sending out across channels. It's really, really difficult to coordinate all of those messages and make them coherent if you don't have good data underlying it. And the other thing that I think is absolutely critical is that we need better data so that we can do what I think is a pretty massive realignment around analytics to focus on customer centric metrics instead of campaign centric metrics.
mm,
I think today we are still very focused on measuring campaigns and creating campaigns, and we think that that's our job, and that is not our job. Our job is to serve customers and to increase subscriber and customer lifetime value, but that's not really how we report our success. It's not how we're kind of measured on our success. It's a lot more around campaigns, and I
mm.
think part of that is that we have this data gap, right? Like the data that we can easily get is the campaign stuff, so we focus on that, and we tend to focus on metrics that we can very easily get. But long-term success is all about maximizing customer engagement, customer lifetime value, revenue per customer, that kind of stuff, and not so much the campaigns. And I think it's how we've sort of led to this place where campaign volume is just always increasing year over year, always going up and up and up. And with some of our brands that we work with, they're starting to have that reckoning where they're like, all right, what are we doing here? Why do we keep kind of doing like the same thing? And like we had one brand that we work with, and others, but one that I would call out, the Vitamin Shop, where they over the holiday season reduced their email volume by 20%, but increased their email marketing revenue by 25%, simply by sending fewer emails to the folks who were less engaged and sending more messages to the folks that were engaged. Which, when I say that, it seems like absolute common sense, but that's not what most brands do today. Most brands
Right.
are sending
More.
largely the same amount of stuff to everybody, but we're reaching this point where it's time to kind of rethink, what are you really doing here, and you know, do you really have the focus on the right place?
Yeah.
And that's a conversation we're having with a number of our brands.
Yeah. Well, and that in and of itself is another podcast episode, right? That's,
For sure.
what are the metrics that really matter? There's a lot of things that we can measure, and maybe email open rate is not the thing that drives business necessarily.
Probably it's not.
No, it's a factor, right? And of course, we want to look at all the things, but there's typically only a few metrics for each business that really, really drive and move the needle. So focusing and knowing what those are and having an agreement amongst your teams and cross-functionally agreeing on what success looks like is actually a big challenge. It's actually really hard. But yeah, we'll save that for another conversation. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Chad. This is a really incredible conversation. It's such important stuff, and I appreciate all the tips and really actionable recommendations that you shared with us today that I'll definitely take some stuff away, and hopefully everyone listening in will as well.
Thanks for having me on, Jen.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in today. You can find Chad on LinkedIn and check out his latest research at Oracle Digital Experience Agency. His book, Email Marketing Rules, is available on Amazon. Visit growgetter.io for more insights on B2B marketing strategy. And don't forget to subscribe to Marketing Demystified wherever you get